international papers here on France 24, and of course NATO summit is dominating a lot of them, isn't it, Elena?
Yeah, the New York Times today is focusing on how Obama's policy has changed over Afghanistan, which is, of course, the main subject of this NATO summit. They expect him to announce all US troops will be out by the end of summer 2013. And they say this is part of a general change in his thinking since he's become president. He didn't come into power really believing that the US could do much to change Afghanistan in the long term, unlike the Bush administration, of course, which wanted to make really wide-ranging changes. But what he thinks can be accomplished by the US in Afghanistan, they say, has reduced over time and got narrower and narrower until really the president thinks they can accomplish very little and it's best to get out as quickly as possible. The real problem, according to them, is in Pakistan. Now, that's what the Times is focusing on today, on Pakistan causing trouble at this NATO summit. They say Obama has refused to meet Pakistani President Asif Ali Zardari because he's insisting that he'll only reopen the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan to US supply troops if they pay $5,000 per lorry, which the US is refusing. So nothing going on better really between the US and Pakistan, who've of course been at loggerheads for months over issues like Pakistani troops being killed and of course drone strikes. Foreign Policy magazine is focusing on drones, unmanned drones being used in the Afghan-Pakistan border area today. They say that one of the unannounced stories of this NATO summit is that the countries have agreed to invest more in developing and expanding the drone programme, which they reckon is completely unethical, saying that the list of potential targets for this programme seems to have expanded rather. It started, of course, with just known Al-Qaeda members in the Pakistan borderlands. Now it's ended up being people like known pirates in Somalia or Islamist extremists in Yemen. Does America really have a mandate to take those people out? Well, Foreign Policy doesn't really think it should, even if it does, and they say that this dehumanisation of warfare is very dangerous.
Now, another subject which is occupying the British and American papers a lot this morning, this is the death of Abdel Basit al-Maghahi, of course, the only man convicted of the Lockerbie bombing, which killed 270 people in 1988.
Yes, PM rejects new Lockerbie inquiry as Maghahi dies is the Guardian's front page. They say David Cameron says that as far as he's concerned, Abdel Basit al-Maghahi was the Lockerbie bomber. He was convicted. He doesn't want there to be another judicial inquiry. Thing is, the Prime Minister is far from consensus, rather, in his opinion that Maghahi was definitely the Lockerbie bomber. The newspaper says there are huge amounts of doubts over the case. Of course, people have been picking holes in this for years. Even families of the victims, at least in Britain, have long had doubts over whether Maghahi was really guilty. Of course, the families of the American victims killed on that plane have long been more convinced, and they were the ones who campaigned most strongly against his being released from a Scottish prison in 2009. But The Guardian picks out all kinds of mistakes in his conviction, saying that, for example, the chief prosecution witness mistakenly identified him and then received a large amount of cash from a mysterious source immediately after the conviction. And of course, at that time in 2001, Gaddafi was clearly looking for someone to pin this crime on to help him smooth over his relations with the West, especially with Britain, at a time when he was becoming rather more publicly, socially acceptable, if you like, with Western leaders. So Guardian reckons his conviction was very unsafe. Robert Fisk in The Independent goes further. He, of course, is a very experienced Middle East correspondent. He reckons there were connections with both Lebanon and Palestine in the Lockerbie case, and there's no evidence necessarily to link it back to Gaddafi at all. And Jim Swire, whose daughter Flora was killed in this bombing, has written a piece for The Times in which he says he's going to continue to campaign to have Maghahi's name cleared because he believes he's innocent. Although that newspaper's editorial takes a very different line. It says that Maghahi's death proves that he should never have been released from a Scottish prison and that his release is a blot on the Scottish justice system.
And finally, Spain, of course, is in the front line, really, the Euro crisis. You picked this story out there. One town in the Madrid suburbs, an unusual solution.
Yes, this is a US casino tycoon who, according to The Independent, plans to build a €20 billion casino development in Alcorcón, which is in the Madrid suburbs. But although this is going to create 250,000 jobs, they reckon, not everyone is happy. There was a big demonstration stayed at the weekend where protesters staged a mock execution by firing squad of a dummy that was meant to represent the local area's environment, which they think will be destroyed by this casino development. The problem is, though, unemployment's so high in that area, the local government might just not really have a choice about whether to approve it or not.
OK, we shall wait and see. Elena, thank you very much. Elena Casas there with the international papers here on France 24.